I can see Daniel. Dominic. Dominic. I think this is 0. I can see all now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Peter. Yeah, I think it's working now.
Yes.
So what about the attendees? They are going to log in again, or?
No, I think they have already logged in. We have two attendees now.
But previously it was 12.
No, the 12 was plus us.
Yes, Mark, it works now. Still, now it's working. Yeah. Only one.
Comrade
it's
good
working.
morning.
It's working now. Yeah,
okay. Good morning, Danny.
Sorry, Mr. Desalegne.
Yes.
Mr.
How are you?
Please allow us to
Thank you,
assign us the channels for interpretation.
Okay. My colleague, she's working on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Peter.
Yeah, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good to have you here. And Ndinaye.
Thanks.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Good to have you here. Sorry for these technical problems. I think we are on the track. And who's left now?
I think Markus.
Markus, yes. And what about Kingsley?
Yes, let me find out.
Yes, Markus, you are on now.
All right.
So far we have 8 attendees. So who's left now?
Kevin, are you still there, or I can't find you?
Kevin?
Yeah.
Hello, Belay? Belay?
Okay.
Can you hear me, Belay?
Yes, I can hear you.
I didn't see Kevin. Could you please inform him that he's offline so that he should be back on? Yes, he's back. Kingsley de Carro? Okay. So Daniel? 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 Can you hear me? Daniel? Can you hear me, Daniel?
Yes, Amanuel. Yes, Amanuel.
What about Kingsley?
Yeah, he had a little problem. He will join us in the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
and since we are recording, we can begin even before he joins.
So are you proposing we should proceed without Kingsley?
Yes, we should proceed without him. He will join.
Okay.
Yes.
The translator is on? Okay. Let me on my camera. Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. And welcome to today's webinar on the team regional webinar on the reform of international corporate taxation. Before I begin to explain the program outline for today's session, I would like to thank all the panelists and the audiences as well for taking your time to be here today with us. As you all know, as most of you know by now, my name is Amanuel Desalegne. I'm the program manager at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Africa Union Cooperation Office, and I will co-moderate today's session together with Daniel Oberko. He's a tax and trade organizer at the Public Service International. This webinar is co-organized by the Friedrich Ebert, TGNA, and PSI, and also AIDC. And I would like to thank a colleague from AIDC, particularly Dominic, for his immense contribution and active participation in runner-up to this webinar. This webinar is the first webinar. We will have the follow-up webinar on the 28th of September. So we will send the registration link for that in the next few days. For today's session, we have three distinguished panelists, and Alvin Misiemaf, he's an executive director of the TGNA, and Ndinaye Charumbira, sorry if I mispronounce your name. She's working for the African Union Department of Economic Affairs, and also Prince Peter Adeyemi from PSI Global. And also we will have Markus Awater to give his opening remark from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. So just to introduce our program schedule, we will assign 20 minutes for each panelist, and then after we will have a Q&A session. And the other point I would like to remind our audiences that there is a language translation feature enabled. So there is English to French and French to English. You can find the channels at the bottom of your screen, and you can tune into whichever language you prefer. And to remind you again, this webinar is recorded. So if you miss anything, you don't have to worry. We will be sending around on-demand recording when it is available. I think it's time to start the webinar. And I would like to invite Markus Awater, Director of the Friedrich Ebert Cooperation Office, to give his opening remark.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung AU Cooperation Office to the webinar Recommendations for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation, which is co-organized by FES, TGNA, PSI, and AIDC. Let me start by thanking our partners from TGNA, AIDC, and PSI, as well as my colleagues, Amanuel and El Shaddai from FES AU, for the excellent partnership and the hard work preparing today's webinar. All partners in this endeavor are very fortunate to welcome participants from AU member states, the regional economic communities, national tax administration offices, civil society organizations, trade unions, and international organizations today. The tax to GDP ratio for many African countries stands at under 20% compared to the OECD average of around 1/3. This shows the importance for many African countries to strengthen their tax administration to enhance domestic resource mobilization and develop financial autonomy. A crucial step towards this end is to properly tax multinational corporations. The OECD's inclusive framework on base erosion profit shifting, BEPS 2.0, offers an exceptional opportunity for the continent to come together and speak with one voice to overcome the challenges posed by the digitalized economy and MNCs. Base erosion and profit shifting is a global issue, and it requires global solutions. The international nature of tax planning means that unilateral and uncoordinated action will not be sufficient and may make things even worse. The current OECD 20 project, designed to address the root causes of BEPS, is a collective international effort to assist both developed and developing countries. It is important to recognize, however, that the risks and challenges from BEPS for developing countries are different both in nature and scale to those faced by developed countries. BEPS solutions need to be developed and evaluated with a focus on developing countries and with regard to their specific needs. As you all know, corporate income tax is a substantial source of taxation in Africa, amounting to over 25% of total revenues in most countries. It is therefore important that more countries participate in the fight against BEPS to reduce the risks associated with taxing the digital economy and MNCs. The growth of MNCs and the digital economy requires the continent to develop robust solutions and policies to strengthen its tax systems. Ladies and gentlemen, the outbreak of the coronavirus has shown that the global order is both fragile and dynamic. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to put both health systems and national economies under enormous pressure. Governments continue to strain their fiscal revenues as they implement emergency measures and recovery plans. This also has a significant negative effect on tax revenues. In many African countries, the pandemic has exacerbated an already dire tax revenue situation. The capacities of African states to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic are seriously decreased by illicit financial flows resulting from transnational crime, poor tax laws, and corruption. The African continent is estimated to be losing at least $50 billion per year through IFFs. Without curbing IFFs out of Africa and thereby enhancing domestic resource mobilization, it will be extremely difficult to overcome the current crisis and to achieve the sustainable development goals. It is therefore crucial to implement the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, a strategy on how to finance the SDGs and to combat tax evasion in IFFs through stronger regulation and international cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that our discussion today and in the second webinar on 28 September will be of great help to all of us to gain a better understanding of the issues discussed. To this end, and in order for us to engage in a dialogue that goes well beyond today's discussion, we have invited panelists for the two webinars from international organizations like the AU, but also from trade unions and civil society organizations to provide us with a broad range of perspectives and experiences. Hopefully, these events will contribute to forge strong partnerships amongst all stakeholders to enhance domestic revenue mobilization in Africa and to intensify the fight against IFFs through comprehensive tax reforms and policy development. Let me stop here and for now wish all of you fruitful and insightful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus. Now I will hand over the floor to Daniel Oberko. Daniel?
Right. Thank you very much, Amanuel, and thank you to the Resident Director of FES, the AU Cooperation Office. And thanks to the panel members and the participants for joining. This won't be the first, and this won't be the last. This is actually the beginning of a number of engagements we are going to have regarding the issue of illicit financial flows, and especially on the continent on how AU's position is in relation to curbing illicit financial flows. Like it has earlier been indicated, the first one is today. We'll have a second one on the 28th of September, the same time. Let me also say that this meeting falls in line with the global day of action on tax justice. And so these activities we are implementing also falls in line with that. And we are doing this also with the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, a coalition of CSOs and trade unions working on the issue of illicit financial flows. To begin with, since the release of the Mbeki panel reports and the various leaks, we have seen a lot of trade unions and CSOs work around the issue of tax. We have witnessed national and in some cases global steps to address the issue of illicit financial flows. In this whole process, we have made several demands. Now, to reiterate some of these demands and the next steps, especially in the post-pandemic era, we have Comrade Peters Prince Adeyemi. He's the Vice President of the Public Services International and the General Secretary of the Non-Academic Staff of Educational and Associated Institutions based in Nigeria. He's going to lead us to discuss the topic, why tax justice matters to labor and ordinary citizens. Without much ado, I would hand over the session to Comrade Peters Adeyemi. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and other very distinguished brothers and comrades. I will, without wasting time, just go straight to my presentation. Why tax justice matters to labor and ordinary citizens. For decades, the development debate has been dominated by the story of foreign aid and how it helps developing countries, especially in Africa, to eradicate poverty and improve their population's welfare. We have also been told that it is only by lowering taxes for foreign firms that we can create development. We are told that it is only when we allow them into our extractives, food and agriculture, water, energy, and infrastructure with reduced tax rates, tax holidays, and incentives that we can have the opportunity to develop and build a resilient economy. Unfortunately, the reality does not support this. What the data indicate is rather illicit financial flows and how they ensure developing countries lose more to rich countries. In a recent study by PSI into the mining industry in Tanzania, special economic zones in Ghana and Nigeria, we realized that between $50 and $500 million is lost to governments as tax incentives granted to multinational companies annually. These are funds that should improve wages and working conditions of workers, build public schools, and provide adequate teaching staff and materials to public schools, provide the necessary conditions to enhance girl-child education, improve health services and delivery, develop a sustainable infrastructure and energy sector, and a robust domestic production sector. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, the demand for tax justice, an end to illicit financial flows, and a complete shift from a development model that favors only the 1% to a people-centered model has become even more critical and non-negotiable. COVID-19 has revealed both our failure and need to invest in health, schools, and public services in general. You would think that governments will automatically invest more in public services. Unfortunately, that is not given. We must fight for it. With IMF and World Bank intervention in response to COVID-19, the obvious are high debt portfolio, austerity measures to reduce public spending, especially public wage bill, low wages, public-private partnership projects in health, education, energy, and infrastructure. Further suppression of workers and community interests, and closing of democratic spaces. Trade unions, civil society organizations, and community organizations must be at the forefront to demand a shift from the current economic model, we must not return to business as usual. Comrades, to this end, we recommend the following in support of the tax justice campaign. 1, to protect and safeguard workers' interests in every sector of the economy. Workers need permanent contracts covered by collective agreement. Despite the major developments in today's economy, a significant proportion of workers do not have permanent work contracts. To deal with illicit financial flows, the rights of workers, including their rights to form or join unions, must be protected. Their health and safety at work should be secured by ensuring that they work with appropriate protective clothing and equipment. We need strong and independent revenue collection agencies. We should ensure tax authorities are independent from all branches of government and from other government agencies and bodies, as well as from influence from economic and political actors. They must be adequately resourced in terms of staff and information technology infrastructure, and have a strong mandate and legal instrument to enforce tax laws and policies. They must be supported to have well-trained, well-remunerated, and motivated professional staff with supportive working conditions who can enjoy their human and trade union rights. They should have the mandate to maintain databases of all companies and trusts registered in their jurisdiction, and their beneficial owners, and whole records of their annual financial accounts. 3, to effectively deal with tax abuse, we need workers and individuals to freely report cases without fear of being victimized or losing their jobs. Trade unions and CSOs must work with other governments under the auspices of the International Labour Organization, ILO, to create an ILO convention for the protection of whistleblowers, which will provide adequate legal protection as well as physical security, if needed, for those who report corporate wrongdoings. 4, governments and global community should develop a framework that will tax multinationals as single global firms based on a formula which gives due weight to the contribution of labor to the creation of corporate profits. Workers across all walks of life are contributors to the profits of capital, hence must only be compensated. 5, in the bid to develop such a formula, we must avoid a race to the bottom. We must adopt a minimum effective tax rate of at least 25% to prevent tax competition based on the factors used in the formula. This should require the efforts of trade unions, CSOs, and tax experts through a sub-regional, regional, and global approach. 6, government institutions and parastatal organizations that have been given the mandate to give out discretionary tax breaks should be stopped immediately. We should phase out tax breaks on profits, including tax holidays, patent box, tax breaks. We must encourage tax incentives linked to, for example, equal hiring of both men and women. 7, government should discourage multinational companies pushing their profits into tax havens. Tax havens have become part of the global financial architecture. The various leaks of the last 5 years, Panama Papers, Paradise Leaks, West African Leaks, Luxembourg Leaks, and Luanda Leaks are clear manifestations that multinational companies use and continue to use tax havens to hoard their profits. It has been reported that as of 2019, $420 billion of corporate profit from about 79 countries is shifted into tax havens. Countries should discourage corporations stashing their profits in tax havens by instituting higher withholding taxes, denying tax deductions for payments to related parties in tax havens, and bar companies which use tax havens from bidding for public contracts. 8, government and the global community must require all multinationals to publish country by country reports in line with global best practice standards in an open data format and reconcile to multinationals' global accounts. 9, for all government initiatives to combat illicit financial flows, we require a transparent and accountable platform that allows and respects the role and views of trade unions, civil society organizations, women, youth, and all stakeholders. And 10, now more than ever, we need a united and organized front in the fight for tax justice and an end to illicit financial flows. Workers across all spheres of the economy, civil society organizations, community groups, women, and young people must be involved. We must raise our voices and demand change now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Peters Adeyemi, and thank you for reiterating some of the major demands regarding the fight against illicit financial flows and why this whole campaign concerns workers and ordinary citizens. We appreciate the fact that you highlighted the major concerns regarding how corporations should be, should be able to pay fair taxes, basically. And I think that in moving forward, we would want to take on another discussion. I would want to alert the attendees that if you have a question, there's the Q&A button. Kindly click on that and send forth your question. It shall be responded to. Or you can also use the chat button to send in some questions. Kindly indicate if there's need for a major intervention. You can indicate that by raising your hands using the buttons on the platform or on the interface. You shall be accordingly noticed and given the opportunity to make that intervention. Thank you very much. So at this juncture, I would want us to invite our brother and our friend, Alvin Misioma, who is the Executive Director of Tax Justice Network Africa. He would lead us to discuss some of the major demands regarding the issue of illicit financial flows and how national governments and an institution like the AU can position itself to make the necessary changes. Thank you very much and welcome, Alvin. Hello, Alvin. I think there's a slight problem. Hello, Alvin.
I think we lost communication.
Yes, we've lost communication with Alvin. In that case, I think we should have Ndinaye Charumbira from the Africa Union Department of Economic Affairs to do her presentation. Is that fair?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hello?
Okay, yes, I'm here. And
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, right. So I think since we have Alvin, let's have him. Alvin, please go ahead.
Sorry, apologies again.
Hello, Alvin, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay. So thank you very much, colleagues, and for this invite. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy that this meeting coincides with the campaign, the Global Days of Action, that is organized under the umbrella of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, and I would encourage all of you, those that are online, to also tweet using that line. Is an annual event that TGNA, in collaboration with other regional partners, will bring together. So I'm happy that this meeting falls within that period of the campaign. First, I think that it is important first to underscore that in this era of COVID, there's a lot of focus on the health dimension of the crisis. But as we have seen, at least from the African context, is that the COVID crisis is really an economic crisis that whose implication is gonna be felt years to come. The crisis, the COVID-induced crisis, as I would put it, is going to have a disproportionate effects on low-income countries of the continent. The projection indicate a major economic recession with significant contraction of the economy of many African countries. And what we have noted is that many countries in the continent are being caught between the rock and the hard place. On one side, the need to provide tax reliefs to taxpayers and businesses as an effort to try and basically caution them from the economic meltdown, while at the same time trying to consolidate tax collection. We have seen a number of countries in the continent introducing different measures aimed at supporting businesses and taxpayers, including cash transfers, corporate income tax reductions, credit reliefs, lowering of corporate income tax. And the impact of this is, while on one side it is supporting businesses, it is significantly eating up into already constrained public coffers. It is important also to underscore that many countries in the continent were already in an economic distress even before the crisis. We saw statistics indicating that many of the countries were missing their revenue targets. A growing debt, the indebtedness of many of the African countries is a major issue of concern, and we are seeing many of countries actually spending a big chunk of the incomes that they are raising to service debt. These rates going up to about 40% of the total revenue collected, going into debt servicing. A major disruption in major economic sectors, including agriculture and tourism. As you know, some of these, particularly in the area of agriculture, is a bedrock for many African countries, and the disruption of this is, of course, all signals of an impending crisis, economic crisis on the continent.
Okay.
So while in the short term, really there is need to focus on the short-term support to assist vulnerable communities in the economic sector, I think the bigger question we need to be asking ourselves is, how does this crisis provide an opportunity for a structural transformation of the continent? And the ambition really is to ensure that we are not going back to normal, because normal was the problem, in the sense that the COVID crisis has just lifted a veil that, as it goes to show the kind of structural problems that the continent, many of the African countries have been facing. And this really underscores the importance of focusing on domestic resource mobilization and the need to tackle illicit financial flows. And therefore, this meeting, I think the conversation we're having right now could not have come at a better time. The conversation on illicit financial flows has largely been focusing on the technical arguments. Both if you look at particularly at the global level, it has been basically being framed as a technical conversation, the base erosion, profit shifting conversation, highly technical, that has to some extent contributing to having a silos conversation and removing effective participation of the different actors in the debate on the reforms, on the global reforms of the international tax architecture. But you will all agree with me that ultimately the solutions to illicit financial flows are not only technical solutions, but they are policy solutions, but to a bigger extent, political solutions. The fight against IFF is not a technical fight, it's a political fight. And this fight is being fought at the different levels. It is being fought at the national level between the different interests, be it trade unions, civil society, vested interest in business, the political elite. At the regional level, within the African continent, what we see, of course, is the emergence of what has already been mentioned of poor coordination and lack of cooperation between regions, the sub-regions of be it EAC, ECOWAS, another REX, where we see countries competing with each other in effort to attract foreign investment. And this really underscores the need of trying to frame the question of the effort to tackle illicit financial flows as a political conversation. And that will need political answers. The high-level report, as it were, which is the foundation of the conversation in the continent, which led to the adoption through the AU special declaration, was really a monumental time for the continent, because it helped the continent stand with one voice, being able to have a political position on what the solutions to IFF is, particularly at a time when there was huge conversations and disparities between discussions between IFF being a conversation on criminality and corruption versus the more progressive positioning of looking particularly at the tax avoidance conversation. And I think that what the high-level report did was to help shape that conversation, and particularly contributing it to the other global processes that ensued, including the finance for development conversation and the sustainable development agenda. So while we note that at the national level, there has been steps taken by different countries to implement some of the recommendations of the high-level panel. We note, for example, recently, countries such as Senegal and Zambia have annulled their treaty, their double tax treaty with Mauritius, and in Kenya, as you might know, there's been a long court case going on between the similar treaty between Kenya and Mauritius. So we see, for example, in the area of double tax agreements, some countries waking up to realize the implications of these treaty networks and how it is impeding their capacity to generate revenue. In the area of beneficial ownership, similarly, some baby steps being taken by some countries in Kenya, in Ghana, and in some countries, where countries have started putting in place measures that would make it difficult for companies to hide their true ownership. In the area of tax incentives, equally similar efforts to harmonize and develop sub-regional mechanisms for coordination of tax incentives. The East Africa communities is an example to give in this particular case. Even you look at the asset recovery, the development of the common Africa position on asset recovery. On digital taxation, some anecdotal examples of countries introducing measures such as Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, in the effort really to capture revenues from the digital sector. So at the national level, really, what we are seeing is some few examples of countries recognizing the importance of sealing the loopholes at the domestic level that would allow and facilitate domestic resource mobilization. However, having said that, there is no clear mechanism in place to systematically track and assess the effectiveness of this implementation. And this is something that I think we have constantly tried to highlight at the regional level conversations, particularly under the auspices of the IFF consortium, which was really a follow-up mechanism that was established by leading African agencies such as AU, ETAF, UNECA, and collective of civil society organizations. We have tried to emphasize on the need for a mechanism that we are able to systematically monitor and track what African countries are doing in their effort to tackle illicit financial flows and the kind of steps that they are putting in place to be able to do that. But more importantly, I think the bigger conversation is what is happening at the global level. And here really, the big question that we have been raising here is that the rule setting in terms of the reforms of the international financial architecture or the international tax architecture is still under the dominance of rich countries organized under the OECD, talking of the BEPS process. And developing countries and African countries have been relegated to a sideshow with basically being brought on board only when it comes to adoption of those measures that have been developed by rich countries. And this really reemphasizes the need, and I think the colleague from PSI spoke about this, on the need of creating a level playing field, creating a system where all countries are represented on the equal footing. And this has been the call that civil society organizations, groups such as the G77 have been pushing for a long time on the need for establishment of a UN tax convention, where we will be able to ensure that both rich countries and poor countries are sitting around the table and having a conversation, a policy conversation. As I started saying earlier, the issue of global reforms is not just a question of technicality, it's a political question, and the political questions require political institutions that are able to lead those processes. And the OECD, in our own assessment and our own engagement, is not the right space to lead these processes. Now, I think when it comes to solutions, it's important to I think recognize that the IFF question would require solutions at the different levels. At the national level, there are a number of things that countries should do, can do, to be able to seal the loopholes that facilitate revenue leakage. We have mentioned issues around tax incentives and the treaty networks that countries are voluntarily negotiating and signing, putting in place, particularly when it comes to the issue of transfer pricing, which, as it were, is the biggest source of revenue leakage. Putting in place mechanisms that would make it difficult to for companies to basically hide their business transactions. So the measures at the national level, I think, have their place in the conversation on IFF. At the regional level, I think, or at the sub-regional level, the bigger question becomes also coordination, and this is where we see over the recent, at least this over the recent years, the last 2-3 years, some loss of momentum in terms of the leadership that should be provided by the African institutions, particularly AU, in global positions, in terms of coordinating this work at the regional level, working with the other sub-regional bodies, because even if those positions were opened up at the global level, if the African countries don't have a united front, then we end up becoming subdivided as it one. As we all know, richer countries have always benefited from the divide and rule of African countries. We saw this in the WTO conversations. We have seen this in the different global forums where when African countries are not having a common position on different issues, then the gains of being in those spaces basically doesn't add value. And therefore, really, I think when it comes to the need for regional coordination, and I would like to hear remarks in this for the next speaker, the role that the African Union and African institutions should play in coordinating African positions on this agenda, be it on the issues around digital taxation, be it on issues around basically protecting the African tax base and African tax base. Really important so to underscore that as we enter into these global spaces. For example, when it came to, just to cite an example of the BEPS process, base erosion profit shifting as a concept itself is important, but the factors that undermine African tax base are different, could be different as factors that undermine the tax base of European countries. So it is important for that reason to really ensure that as African countries, we have that space where those policy conversations are happening, where we are coming together and developing a shared understanding and shared positioning before we get into the global space. And lastly, I think at the global level, just to re-emphasize again, recognizing that no matter what African countries do at the domestic level, if we don't have a concerted global solution to these issues, we will be scratching on the surface. Tax, as much as it is a national issue, we talk of tax sovereignty, ultimately the way the global system, the multinational companies have structured themselves without a global framework that ensures that other countries are not playing beggar than ever policies. They are not establishing mechanisms such as the role that tax havens play in this particular case, where they design their policies deliberately with the effort of providing opportunities for profit shifting or enabling aggressive tax avoidance. I think this re-emphasizes and understands the need for global solutions, and even more importantly, for African countries to be on the table where those discussions are being held and those solutions are being found. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Alvin, and thank you for that very insightful discussions and points. I think you make, apart from the various demands that the first speaker outlined, you also make certain critical comments and statements. So, for example, you are saying that we should never go back to normal because normal was the problem, and you reiterate very strongly that the fight against IFFs is not just it's not a technical fight. It's actually a political fight. And on this, I can imagine that you are agreeing with someone like Thomas Piketty, who says that tax is political. You have also indicated that countries are making or are taking measures at the national level, but there's no mechanism, in place to estimate the outcome of these initiatives. Now, most critically, you say that the rule setting is still under the dominance of the OECD. And I can imagine that you are begging the question, or you are asking for an Africa-led, a UN-led kind of leadership when it comes to the issue of the governance of tax. It's on this note that I would like to introduce our next speaker, who works with the AU in the Department of Economics, in the person of, let me get the name right, Ndinaye Charumbira.
Yes.
Yes.
Please, you are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Ndinaye Charumbira. I'm a policy officer in the Department of Economic Affairs of the African Union Commission. And we wish to take this opportunity to thank you for associating the African Union Commission with this very important conversation. I think the previous two speakers raised some very critical issues, and Alvin has tasked me to explain what role the African Union is playing. I think really the basis of the work that the African Union does in terms of domestic resource mobilization and illicit financial flows stems from Agenda 2063. And in particular, there's the first 10-year implementation plan, which has a financing mechanism. And therein, DRM was put at the forefront by the African leaders as the best solution to fund our infrastructure on the continent and economic development in general. So, like I'm saying, DRM and this partnership strategy for the first 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 is recognized as the sole continental framework for resource mobilization. And all related partnerships which should really be leading the member states and all other stakeholders at the national, regional, and continental levels, including the bilateral and multilateral development partners in their development and cooperation endeavors. So there are basically three dimensions that we look at, and that is expanding and mobilizing domestically generated financial resources. There we are looking at fiscal revenue collection and utilization. We are looking at enhancing financial inclusion, especially when it comes to the informal sector. And then there are also relevant innovations in DRM that we should utilize. And then the second issue is that we're looking at intermediating and leveraging savings on the continent so that we are able to finance the Agenda 2063 projects at the national, regional, and continental levels. And then finally, there's access to finance facilitation measures such as project development and some de-risking vehicles, so to speak. I think really the the work on financing the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, I was going to start by outlining, giving some bit of background, but Alvin has done that. And he did mention that the African countries were already in a very weak position in terms of the macro fiscal conditions. We had high external debt levels, and we had increasing fiscal deficits. So really, the emergency response from for the pandemic was limited due to the rising cost of borrowing and the slump in commodity prices. So we saw a lot of revenue losses, especially for our commodity-dependent African countries, but really for all countries, given that the tourism and travel sector was badly hit. So I will not go into all those details because Alvin has covered that, but just to give some recommendations on that front, on what African countries can do to recover in terms of taxation, before I go into what the African Union is doing to lead the IFF fight. So one recommendation is that the digitization of the African economy is key to increasing efficiency in resource mobilization. And that is going to help us to expand the tax base for the continent. And this really should entail a holistic approach for taxation of the digital economy. I think that is an important aspect, because we saw that as countries introduced lockdown measures, the digital economy kind of took the lead somehow. So there's need for us to tax the digital economy and to get involved in that conversation at the global level. We also need to continue with training and capacity building of tax administrators and officers. And African countries should also be encouraged now more than ever to adopt digital technologies so that we are able to automate the tax administration processes. And that will also help us to improve tax compliance and also, I guess, revenue collection. And we also need to address our policy issues cohesively. And we should ensure that there's continuous engagement and education of the public and the the revenue officials. There should be that continuous engagement so that the public is aware of what their role is in mobilizing resources for financing the public services that serve them. I think that we also need to have coordinated effort to systematically bring the informal sector into that tax net. We should, there should be programs that allow for financial inclusion. And like I was saying, there should also be some education around the civic duties of taxpayers or of the informal sector as taxpayers. And there should just be that continuous engagement and education around those issues. I think when it comes to IFFs, the most important thing that we are doing at the African Union Commission leading the member states is to engage in partnerships. Like we have partnerships with the Global Forum, and we are trying to encourage member states to participate in the Africa initiative of the Global Forum for transparency and exchange of information, tax transparency and exchange of information. So we are encouraging member states to be part of that. Currently, there are 32 countries who are members of the Africa Initiative. And if we believe that if more countries participate, then there'll be that exchange of information, including automatic exchange of information. And that could also assist countries to increase their revenues if they engage in those processes. We have also just been talking to the OECD, like you are saying, the OECD is leading this work, and the African Union is working to be an observer in the inclusive framework on BEPS, because really the AU has not been participating in that process. And it is important that we engage so that our member states, we are able to lead our member states in those discussions. And that will bring me then to the question on whether a UN-led leadership on global tax governance is welcome. And I think it's something that we need to engage with our member states on that. And it seems very likely that the UN is the most appropriate body to lead on global tax governance. And the African Union will be happy to support that process because then we are able to form positions, common positions around issues of taxation and submit them to a globally led process. And then we also have, we are engaging in in illicit financial flows through basically, we are through the EU and through the OECD. We have just started a project, and we are looking at three, I think I would say three axes that we will be engaging on curbing illicit financial flows. And that includes properly measuring and assessing the scale and magnitude of IFZFs and corruption on the continent, so that we know that their true nature and we know the exact magnitude. The high-level panel report talked about $50 billion per annum, but there are so many numbers that are out there. So that is one of the projects that we want to engage in. Also, we are going to be raising awareness and engaging in advocacy to ensure that people around the continent, the CSOs, the journalists, members of parliament are able to engage with these issues, just the general public, so that they're able to raise these questions, and maybe then when they are engaged, this can help curb IFFs, curb corruption on the continent. And then the third axis is capacity building. And by that we are going to be engaging with institutions on the continent to build their capacity to be able to combat illicit financial flows. So I think I will end it at that, and wish to thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ndinaye Ndinaye, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and for highlighting the need for a UN-supported, agenda to ensure. The AU's plan to or preparedness to support a UN agenda to ensure that global tax governance is a UN-led process. Thank you very much. And also, you highlighted a number of issues regarding the role of UN and what initiative the UN is taking. At this juncture, there are a number of questions that are flowing in our link, and so I would put it forth for the speakers to respond to. Let me again say that if you intend to make any intervention, kindly show by hand using the Zoom platform, and you shall be accordingly given the opportunity to speak. Moving forward, there are two questions, and I'll throw it across for us. This is coming from James, who stays from the NLC Nigeria. He says that with the advent of COVID-19 and the discussions around national interest priority and delinking from global orders as part of the new normal, do we still need to pursue a multilateral arrangement on taxes and investments? Then the second question is it not high time we advocate for abolition of tax treaties that are prompting some of the sharp tax practices that hinders Africa's development progress? So we'll deal with these two questions, and then from there, we'll give the opportunity to Ndinaye to make an intervention. So first of all, let's deal with the two questions, and then Ndinaye will make an intervention. So the floor is open to any of the panelists to respond to this question. Alvin, you want to go forward?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Let me give the first attempt to respond to the question. On the first question about the need to pursue multilateral arrangements, I think that it will be, of course, there's a lot of criticism about the death of multilateralism. We look at the different spaces, be it on trade, on climate and others. There's been a growing criticism about how these processes are led and how they have managed really to somewhat kick away the ladder, if I might use that expression, when it comes to Africa's transformation. But then when you ask your question of when you remove multilateralism, what do you remain with? That, I think, is a question that remains, because as I was saying, the challenges that we face, be it of taxation, unless you want to live in an island, every country has to trade with each other. We have companies' investment coming in or leaving our countries, so we can't delink from globalization. But when you look at the downside of globalization and the need for its regulation, the solutions there lie either in a multilateral framework where then everyone is on the table and agreed under this global village, how do we operate with each other? Or we leave it to what it was in the early 80s and 90s, where it was the IFIs that were setting the agenda, the IMF and the World Bank that were really leading. And we were very critical at that time about how particularly these two institutions, the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, were usurping the functions of multilateral agencies, particularly organized under the UN. So I don't think that delinking from a multilateral system is the solution. It's really, actually, on the contrary, it's really pushing to ensure that those institutions are empowered, those institutions are strengthened, and also that they are taking their place and they are playing their functional role when it comes to the tax specifically, is to really ensure that the UN, the call that we have for UN tax body, that body is effective, that it is delivering on its mandate. So in a nutshell, I don't think that delinking from multilateralism is the solution, because if we did that, it is the poor countries that will suffer most. The rich will always get away with it. If you look at the American exceptionalism, as it were, and who is bearing the brunt of that. When it comes to the question of double tax agreements, DTAs really serve the purpose of ensuring that countries are not paying tax twice. And in that particular case, if they were well designed, they serve their purpose. And for example, we have been advocating for a treaty network between the East African community. There's already that bill is in, the DTA is in existence, but it has not been ratified because one country in the East Africa community has been resisting signing to it before it can be ratified by the East African communities. And these countries, and many a times they are the largest trading partners. Kenya and Uganda are the largest trading partners in the region. And therefore they need to be able to streamline those businesses and making sure that companies that are Kenyan that are operating in Uganda are not facing double tax. In that case, a double tax agreement within the East Africa region becomes important as a tool for facilitating trade between regions. And more importantly, in this era of the Africa free trade area, if we were to push and pursue an agenda of intra-Africa trade, the issue of facilitating that through ensuring that companies are not basically facing double taxation is important. Double tax agreements become problematic when they are signed with jurisdictions such are considered as tax havens. And particularly because these tax havens are structured their businesses to treat non-resident in a manner that encourages them tax avoidance. And that's where treaty networks becomes problematic, and that's where double tax agreements particularly with the tax havens become problematic. And the push we have been making is for the revisiting of these double tax agreements to ensure that the countries you are negotiating treaties with are countries you are actually doing substantive business with, not countries that are being used as conduit, as launch pads into jurisdiction. So it is not with Mauritius, it is with the country, and then ensuring that within those treaties you are ensuring that there is no treaty abuse. You are building in a mechanism that ensures that there's no opportunities for treaty abuse, but also importantly that those treaties are in sync and they're in line with your own economic or tax laws at the national level, so that they are not also being abused. Because if you have a situation where there's a contradiction between what your tax law says and what the provisions you are making the tax treaties, then many a times the treaties supersede way how they are formulated, they supersede domestic tax law, and that creates basically opportunities for aggressive tax avoidance. So it's really not, we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater, really. It is to ensure that we are tweaking those laws, we are creating, sealing the loopholes that would allow those treaties to be abused.
Thank you very much, Alvin, for that concise and apt response. I don't know whether the other speakers would want to make a response to the two first questions. Otherwise, we have
the third question as well.
There's a third question, but I think Derejay wants to make an intervention before we go to the third question. So Derejay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A bit sorry that I'm participating not from within Africa, but from Paris. I have been to these meetings before. Let me start by expressing my disappointment. I hoped that the UN General Assembly is in session now, even if virtually. So when I read the title, Reforming International Tax Rules, I thought the debate would be how Africa as a continent will shape its formulation of demands for international tax reform at the UN. I hoped that the discussion would be like the Common African Program, which preceded the negotiation of the SDGs at the UN. There was a regional consultation, and Africa put its voice together, its demands together, and was able to shape the later SDG proclamation of the United Nations as a continent, the common African position was very influential in the formulation of the SDG, which became universal. So in that sense, I would have wished that the center of this thing would be, how can African countries participate in the current deliberation of the United Nations? With which positions will they push for their collective agenda at the global level? In this regard, the centrality being given to the OECD is a bit disappointing. OECD is not a universal membership organization. It is not a philanthropic organization. It brings together rich countries and promotes their interests. So in that sense, it has no mandate to reform international tax rules. It is usurping a role supported by its rich members. So Africa cannot be part of, it is about representing your interests. You are from the labor movement, Daniel. You don't expect employers to represent the interests of the employees. Poor countries vis-à-vis rich countries cannot hope their interests to be represented by the rich. They have to be their own messengers. So in that sense, focusing on the OECD is trying to divide Africa. It is using divide and rule tactics to get some in the fold so that Africa cannot speak in one voice. That is a tendency we have to fight. And even in the best case scenario, if the OECD BEPS reform were to succeed, it will be a reform at the margins. It will affect only 10% of international corporate taxation. They have created a certain mechanism to say they will divide corporate international tax profits into residual and routine. The routine, which is about 90%, will be managed the way it is being done now, giving room for profit shifting as usual. Then the 10%, which is then residual, will be distributed in a very complicated manner. So Africa is not going to get a penny more from this reform process. The second one is it is not being represented. There are some African countries which are active, co-opted into it, but it is not Africa as a whole. So Africa should stand for its interests. And then the most important thing is first looking towards, to look at bringing a common position of African countries to stand together. That is only how Africa has managed to make progress in global negotiations. If Africa goes anywhere disunited, Africa will not achieve anything. It is better to make Africa one country, as some think it is, by bringing positions, aligning positions, and having a common negotiation positions. So it is about fundamental change of international tax rules. If you look at IFF, if you look at multinationals not paying taxes, where do they originate from? Where do these proceeds go? It is the countries hiding, allowing these multinationals to hide their proceeds of tax dodging, which are now telling you what to do to get back this tax. So it's not going to work. Africa has to look inside, look at measures it can do itself as a homework to limit IFF and tax dodging within its power, and then when it is cross-border, it cannot manage it. Act collectively to have a common position. The only place where Africa can raise its voice and join others is the United Nations. So that is why during this Global Days of Action we say, it is not, the United Nations is a weak institution, but there is no alternative to it. It is the only place where multilateralism can work, and we should make it work. By saying the United Nations is not effective, we are going to make the world be ruled by rich countries which decide what is good for us. So my call is to make the whole process inward looking, to formulate Africa's positions first, and then to try to bring these common positions to the international arena. Solidarity with other developing countries. So that is why we are emphasizing a UN-based intergovernmental process is the only forum where adequate measures could be taken to curb illicit financial flows and to curb illicit financial flows and minimize tax dodging. By the way, the OECD process itself is in danger because of the quarrel between Europe and the US. The OECD is trying to appease the US by giving one concession after the other, but they are now, the infighting itself is going to disrupt the whole process. So asking Africa to focus on a process which is doomed to fail is really misleading the continent. Let us focus on our own things, look at what do we want, what can we do on ourselves, what can we try to achieve internationally as a collective one voice continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dereje. And thank you for that apt and very quick response and intervention. I think that time and time again, we have stated our position as far as the OECD is concerned, the fact that it is non-inclusive, the fact that in spite of its own inclusive framework, it puts African countries and members of the AU at one side, prepares a document, and then calls them to endorse. And so basically what we are working at is to ensure that certain some critical interventions like what you have just made would be one of the things we'll be relying on to make our positions very strong and make sure that our positions are heard. Because this gathering is certainly not a gathering to endorse the OECD. It's a gathering to actually understand how the process is and make sure that our interventions are geared towards a UN, the campaign for a UN-led governance and leadership on the issue of tax and illicit financial flows. So there is a thank you very much. On the 28th, we would have a gathering here again, and we'll be dealing with critically some of the main issues regarding the problems we are facing with the OECD and why the UN should be seen to taking the lead with the support of the AU. And so we are very happy that Ndinaye has made it very clear that the AU is ready to support the a UN agenda of global tax governance. Thank you once again, Dereje. There is a third question. I'll put it forward for and I think it's directly to Ndinaye. He says that the person would want to inquire whether this is the need to have a financial inclusion for the informal sector. The person would want to inquire whether this also takes on board the extent to which the informal economy is already contributing to taxes at the level of local government through levies. What is the form that financial inclusion can be for the informal sector that also supports the sector? Apart from responsibility to pay taxes, there is also need for states to acknowledge and provide for the needs of informal sector workers, women in the informal sector, and enterprises. This is coming from Hibist Kasa. So this is a direct question from Ndinaye. May you please provide a response?
Okay, thank you, Hibist, for that question. Yes, you are absolutely right. The informal sector does contribute quite a lot to taxation already. But we also have to agree maybe that a formal economy brings in more efficiency when it comes to domestic resource mobilization. And indeed, you are right to point out that states have a duty to the informal sector. There's a lot that the informal sector can benefit if the informal sector is organized and government provides support, like through business education and maybe like just providing some basic business education, like record keeping, then without necessarily burdening the informal sector operators. And then the same way, government will benefit from taxes from the informal sector, and the vice versa, the informal sector will benefit when the government provides the services that are necessary for the informal sector to thrive. You know, we talk also about banking the informal sector. Yeah, I think it's a conversation that we can continue somewhere. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Further comments and questions? The floor is still open, and it's also very open to the panelists to make further interventions.
Well, Daniel, if I may.
Sure.
I just want to comment on what Dereje said. I think he brought in a very important aspect of the common African position that the African Union had going into the negotiation of the SDGs. And I think now that this has been brought up, this is something we can formally bring to the heads of state and government for a decision to have, to organize the continent and have a common position so that issues around global taxation are negotiated at the United Nations level. I think if we have a common position from the African Union, we can be able to influence that decision that issues around global taxation are spoken about, discussed at the UN level.
Right, thank you very much. I think that critically what we would want to find out or know from the AU is that whether there exists a mechanism through which this kind of positions would be addressed. For example, we have a common position. Is there a mechanism through which trade unions and CSOs can make their own intervention or entry into the AU, which supports the common position of African governments? I think that is an area we have to critically look at. I don't know what you want to respond to.
Yes, absolutely. There are systems at the AU. The CSOs are part of the AU, and when you develop a common position, all the stakeholders have an opportunity to contribute to it, and we learned a lot during the negotiation for the SDGs. We consulted widely on the continent, but I think there are lessons that we could still take from there to make the consultations even broader. So absolutely, the CSOs are very much welcome. And now we have a working mechanism with ATAF, Tax Justice Network, and the various networks around tax issues. So it will be a very easy process to, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Let me interrupt here.
All right.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to Ndinaye. My question is related to the Mbeki report, and one of the recommendations proposed by the high-level panel with regard to the fight against IFF and the corruption, it was to strengthen and establish institutions responsible preventing IFFs, and also reiterates the need to have cooperation between different regional economic blocs and countries. So how do you see the operationalization of such recommendation at a country and regional level, and what has been changed since last recommendation?
Yeah, I think the implementation of the Mbeki recommendations, the high-level panel report, is from various institutions. We have the networks, we have UNECA, but to be honest, there was never that mechanism to submit the recommendations or the implementation, the status of implementation through the African Union. But that has now been set up. So the African Union, particularly the Department of Economic Affairs, is leading this process coordinating all the players on the ground to ensure that whatever recommendations are there and whatever implementation is taking place is able to be reported back to the summit. So it's to kind of have that coordination. So the institutions do exist, and the change that has been made is that the Department of Economic Affairs has now been made the lead coordinator, but of course with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and other partners. I hope that answers your question.
Daniel.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to add my voice to one or two issues there. One of our comrades, that is the Regi, spoke about Africans speaking with one voice or presenting a common position. I was waiting for him to tell us how that is going to be possible. Because when we talk about the illicit financial flows, I think essentially we have found that the culprits are essentially our governments who have been involved in all manners of granting tax reliefs and all the rest of it. I don't know how it is possible for these governments or heads of governments to come and speak with one voice as to how we will present a common position as to how this crisis can be resolved. So I wanted to find out from him how that is possible, whether our African governments have suddenly decided to plug all the loopholes and to abandon corrupt tendencies. That's the first one, because I think some of this crisis has to do with corruption, which is perpetrated by those in government. The second one is to find out whether, as we speak now, the AU actually have a position, common position, on how these illicit financial flows can be checkmated. And the third one is the issue of the informal sector. I know that quite a lot of countries in Africa have not been able to properly organize the informal sector. So I think even the crisis of tax evasion is also prevalent, even in the informal sector, because collection of taxes appear to be done more by those who are employed in the public services. My question is, how are we supposed to get our various governments in Africa to properly organize the informal sector so that even when they now pay their taxes, government will be able to at least respond positively to their needs in terms of provision of basic amenities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Daniel, go ahead.
Okay, so the questions are from 1 to Dereje and then a 2 to Ndinaye. So I think Dereje will make his first response and then Ndinaye will continue. Dereje.
Is it still on?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me say two things on this thing. First is this issue of corruption, which is being used as a pretext for others not to deal with anything in Africa seriously. I remember once I was representing Tax Justice Network Africa and participating in a hearing at the European Parliament. And one of the participants said, "What is the use of stopping illicit financial flows? It will go into corruption." if we stop it, it will go into the pocket of African elites. And my reply was, let us imagine Africans are bad drivers. We didn't justify Europe to send broken cars to Africa by just saying they will crash it anyway. So the thing is, we will learn how to drive. Europe should stop sending us broken cars and send us on good cars. So what do I mean by this? By this I mean, fighting corruption is our homework as Africans within Africa. But we should not allow it to be used as an excuse not to do anything against the plundering of the continent by multinationals. That is the first point. The second point is this: why are we as civil society always interested in intergovernmental processes? Because it is a two-way process. On one hand, we have the possibility of influencing the position of our respective governments on policy issues. On the other hand, the governments come together and try to find a common denominator. When the Common Africa position was evolving, we were fully participating in the formulation process. It was a dialogue between governments as representatives of a country and citizens as governments and citizens. So I am hoping on this dual process. I'm not saying governments left by themselves will not do much. But if there is this combination, governments are forced also by citizens participating in a policy process to adopt some positions. And the clarifying process is a very important thing. So without pressure by Africans on their respective governments, there cannot be progress. But this process is only possible if it is an intergovernmental policy process. What do you do in a secretive OECD meeting in Paris? You cannot influence, even the finance minister cannot know what the position of its revenue authorities are. It is a secretive meeting of such few experts. But policy processes are different. We as citizens have the possibility of influencing the positioning of our respective governments. So when we say, I'm happy that Ndinaye also accepted the idea of this coming to this common Africa position on international tax issues, a very essential thing. So this collaboration of civil society with national government is the key motor to go towards this. Otherwise, if we say our governments are corrupt, they are not going to do anything. Are we going to put Africa under the mandate of the UN? We have to make our governments responsive to the demands of their citizens. That's the only way forward. There can be many cases to be pessimistic about these things, but essentially, progress is only possible. Reforms are only possible when citizens put pressure on their respective governments to move an agenda forward. So that is the process I'm looking at. It is not easy. It might not be possible to have 52 African countries agree on one point in a very short period of time, but having significant number, having more influential countries embark on this is also, there were a lot of pessimism about African Union, but there are a huge lot of achievements in promoting Africa's image, Africa's demands on the global level. So this is possible. That is what we should be striving for. Thank you very much.
Yes, Ndinaye?
Yes, I think Dereje has adequately responded, but I'll just add that attaining good governance is a process, and we must all be involved in it, and particularly the civil society organizations and the citizens. We really have to hold our leaders accountable. And when we produce a common African position, it is a process, like I said. And this time around, we will ensure that as many stakeholders as possible are consulted, so that by the time it reaches the heads of state and government, consultations would have been widely conducted around the continent. And then we can submit what is truly a common African position. That is what I'll say on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is one more question for Ndaraye. The question would be like, we have been, I think someone named Chindu Base, she said that we have been talking about an African position on all the tax issues since the day of Addis Tax Initiative and other strategies. Saying what is the situation, because it has taken so much time and we have ATF and other continental structures. Who is really responsible for coordinating this one voice, and why haven't we made any progress till the day? So Ndaraye, do you want to stress on this? Hello?
Yes, I will try, but the thing is this. Actually, there was a very important process undertaken jointly with African Union and the ECA in the process of the formulation of the high-level panel. And I don't see the pace. I'm sorry, I've also left the continent, and I don't see the pace. There is some loss of momentum. What I found. ATAF is another institution which is really bringing together revenue authorities. It is not. It works at the technical level, not at the policy level. I don't know but I see as the question was being posed, as the person posing the question said, there is a loss of momentum. So now the issue is, but I have to emphasize, African Union, ECA have achieved a lot in bringing the voice of the continent together. I don't know what the internal dynamics is for the loss of momentum, but there is no alternative to them. To make it first the agenda of finance ministers, and then to try to bring it to the attention of heads of ministers, and to involve in the regional consultations toward this position, civil society working on that area. This process has worked, and we have to retry to make it work again. If we give up, that means we are also giving up on African progress. So there are challenges, there are internal dynamics which I don't know that might have reduced the tempo of progress, but that is the only institution that is capable of galvanizing support for the future of Africa in all aspects of questions. So when the issues are clarified, when the policy alternatives are debated by citizens, by government officials, and everybody. So the process, this has itself creates a momentum for governments also to act. So that is what we should keep alive. Let's keep alive the policy alternatives. Let's keep alive the need for governments and civil society to work together for the formulation of an African common position. And let's know, only if Africa speaks in one voice and united, can it also be heard by the others. If OECD can split Africa, they will try to maintain this. Divide and rule was not buried with the end of colonialism. It is an active weapon being used up to now. That is what we have to break by bringing African voices together through this African Union and ECA-led processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndaraye. So is there anyone who'd like to reflect on the things that have been said so far, or otherwise we are running out of time and we should conclude our webinar?
I'd like to come in briefly.
Okay.
I think that the idea of a common Africa position, I think it's important to also add that the expression common Africa position is really comes in when you come to the lingo of the AU, what that basically means as a common Africa position. But it's important to note that the high-level recommendations were not just recommendations. They were adopted as positions of the African Union. African heads of state and government met and adopted those recommendations. So in that regard, and we have seen this play out actually when it comes to some of the global spaces, where I give the example of the discussions around tax avoidance and tax evasion, where the group within the AU basically came out and said, you know, our positions are informed by the adopted recommendations of the high-level panel. And so I think it's, for me, really the bigger question is coordination, and yeah, I'm really happy about the increasing role that the AU is playing in terms of coordinating the actors in this space, because in this global conversation, some of these positions, when they are at, it's really not technical, it's political, really. It's coming up with very high level political positions. Dereje gives some insights, for example, when it comes to the apportionment of profits between residual and your normal profits. When it comes to the taxation of the digital economy, we are not talking of the kind of technical discussions where I have to come up with each of them having a common position. Is really the top level issues when it comes to how do we define IFF? How do we understand the definition of illicit financial flows? What is Africa's position when it comes to digital taxation, when it comes to base and source taxation? So those kind of high level positions, and I think here it's very possible and very practical that the continent can come up with a shared position. And it's a road. It's as it has been said by other speakers, it will not be one action. It is a process which requires that organizations such as ETAF, AU, ECE, and civil society have that space of constant conversation, constant of sharing ideas, and those becomes the basis for kind of formulating this kind of shared understanding on this, and this becomes the kind of positions that then if Nigeria is speaking or if another country is speaking, it is speaking, representing what generally is agreed within the continent.
Thank you, Alvin. I guess we have to conclude now. Before that, there are two things I would like to remind our audiences and also panelists. First, let me thank all the panelists for sharing your insightful thoughts and also perspective on this regard. And I hope our audiences make the best out of it. And the other reminder is for the audience. This is the first webinar. We will have a follow-up webinar next week on the 28th of September at the same time, 1 p.m. East African time. We will focus on the OECD BEPS 2.0 and also the role of sales source and trade unions with regard to the OECD BEPS project. Also, we will talk about more in detail about the sales source engagement in the reform of international taxation system. So thank you, everyone. And one final reminder, there is a petition for your endorsement. Please, you can find this petition on this chat room. You can get that form. Otherwise, we will circulate this petition for your endorsement. And I hope you will participate in this activity. And thank you, everyone, for your time. And I will see you in the next sessions next week. And
okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
It's okay.
Yes, Amanuel. Yes, exactly.
Amanuel is out, Daniel. You want to talk to me?
No, it's fine. Well done. So maybe we can have a discussion on WhatsApp and then we'll continue with it. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you
Okay,
very
we
much.
will do that. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Well done.
ፈልጋለሁ ምግብ ያኛው ቦምቦሊ ነው ዋትስአፕ እንነጋገር አለ በቃ እንድንለው